Hello, today I will be explaining the process of a 3-neuron arc. I will be pointing out each part of the 3-neuron arc and their function, along with how they all tie together. The stimulus I will be using today is a villager being shot by an arrow. How does the villager have the ability to react? The 3-neuron arc consists of 3 neurons, a motor neuron, interneuron, and sensory neuron. First, we will start with the sensory neuron. The overall function of the sensory neuron is to conduct impulse to the spinal cord. The arrow punctures the skin, which then sends information down the receptors into the axon. The axon is this long black and pink strand that sends information away from the cell body. Along the axon is the myelin. The myelin is an insulating layer that forms around the axon. Myelin shows electrical impulses to transmit quickly and efficiently along the nerve cells. In between the myelin is a gap called the nodes of Ranvier. These allow the generation of a fast electrical impulse along the axon. Going down the axon of the sensory neuron receives the cell body. The reason why the cell body is further away from the skin is so that the cell body does not get damaged. When we look in the cell body, there is a nucleus. The nucleus makes DNA, which makes protein, but we will get more to that in a bit. This is why the cell body is further away from the skin, unlike the motor neuron. At the end of the axon, we see axon terminals. The axon terminal marks the end of an axon and is used to connect to the other nerve cells, in this case the inner neuron. The axon terminal of the sensory neuron connects to the dendrite of the inner neuron. This process is called synapse. At the end of an axon terminal, there is a synaptic knob. The synaptic knob is filled with membrane-enclosed vesicles containing a neurotransmitter. Later, I will go more into depth of a synapse. Connecting to the sensory neuron is the inner neuron, whose function is simply to connect the sensory and motor neuron together. The cell body of the inner neuron has dendrites and has axon terminals as well. The axon terminals of the inner neuron connect to the dendrites of the motor neuron. The last neuron of the 3-neuron arc is the motor neuron. The overall function of the motor neuron is to conduct impulse to an effector, and in this case that is muscle. The cell body contains the nucleus and is the main structural component of the gray matter. Within the cell body there is cell membrane, which is made of phospholipids that surround the cytoplasm of the cells. Found in the cell body is the nucleus. The nucleus contains DNA, which is used to make proteins. Also found in the cell body is the mitochondria. The mitochondria make chemical energy which is needed to power the cell's biochemical reactions. We call this chemical energy ATP. All around the cell body are these blue dots, which are sodium channels. When the neuron is at rest, which means before the villager was struck by an arrow, the sodium was the outside of the cell, causing the outside of the cell to be positive and the inside of the cell to become negative. Later, I will explain the diffusion to the sodium within the cell and explain the electrical chart that goes along with it. Here is a more detailed version of the explanation of the synapse. On the left, we have the end of an axon terminal, and on the right, a dendrite. The circle shapes that are shown in the axon terminal are vesicles, and within the synaptic vesicles are neurotransmitters. Between the axon terminal and the dendrite, there is a little space called the synaptic cleft. This is where the two will not exactly join together, but they will meet and connect. When the axon terminal gets excited by action potential, the synaptic vessels release their content into the synaptic cleft. The neurotransmitters then connect to the receptors on the dendrite. This is the process of diffusion of the sodium. This here is an electrical graph. From point A to B, there is resting potential. At point B, there is the initial stimulus of the reaction, in this case when the villager is struck by an arrow. To point C is the threshold stimulus. At point D, which is off of the view but is at the very top, is the action potential. If you remember, when we talked about the synapse, the action potential caused the neurotransmitters to be released from the synaptic vesicles. From point B to D is depolarization, which is taking away the polarity. From D to E is the sodium-potassium pump, and at point F is repolarization.